The afternoon sun burned gently over Kalonji City as Adana stood behind her little wooden stall, arranging jars of her handmade shea butter. The air smelled of roasted corn, dust, and hope. She called out to people passing by with her warm smile. "Sister, try this one. It'll make your skin glow." Some stopped, most didn't. But she kept smiling, even when her feet ached and sweat rolled down her neck. Then a man in a fine suit slowed his steps. He looked around the small market with a smirk before his eyes landed on her stall. "You're wasting your time here," he said with a short laugh. "You'll never make it past this dusty place." His voice carried, and a few people nearby chuckled softly. Adana froze for a second, her smile fading. She wanted to reply, but her throat felt tight. That man, his name was Tariq, was known in the city as one of the youngest executives at a big cosmetics company. He walked away still laughing, leaving Adana standing there with tears threatening to fall. But she blinked them away. In that moment, her silence wasn't weakness. It was the seed of something powerful growing quietly inside her. That night, Adana lay on her thin mattress, staring at the cracked ceiling as the city's sounds hummed outside her small window. The memory of Tariq's laugh kept playing over and over in her mind, sharp and mocking, like a song she didn't want to hear. She felt the sting of his words deep in her chest, the way they tried to shrink her, make her feel small in a world that already seemed too big. She turned toward the corner where her mother slept, the soft light from the flickering lamp painting shadows across the walls. Her mother's voice came back to her, steady and warm. "Child, don't let anyone decide your worth. You are more than their words." Adana closed her eyes and let that thought sink in. She thought about the jars of cream she had carefully made that morning, the tiny stall she had built with her own hands, and the long hours she spent dreaming of something better. Sitting up, she rested her elbows on her knees, clasped her hands together, and made a silent promise. One day she would rise. One day she would build something so strong, so valuable, that the very people who laughed at her would have no choice but to notice. Not because she wanted revenge, but because she deserved recognition. The fire in her heart burned quietly but fiercely, lighting a path through the fear and doubt. She whispered to herself almost like a prayer, "I will show them. I will show the world." Tears pricked at her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. That night, under the dim flicker of the lamp, a small but unbreakable determination settled in her chest. She would not let mockery define her. She would turn it into fuel, and from that fuel, she would rise higher than anyone could imagine. The city outside slept, but inside Adana, a new resolve had awakened, fierce and unstoppable. Days turned into months, and Adana's life became a rhythm of hard work and quiet determination. She woke before the sun, the streets of Kalonji City still empty and cool, and slipped into her tiny kitchen that smelled of shea butter, cocoa, and fresh herbs. With calloused hands, she measured oils, crushed leaves, and stirred mixtures over a small flame, tasting and testing each blend until it felt just right. Each jar she filled wasn't just cream or lotion. It was hope, wrapped in brown paper. A small promise to herself that she could do more than survive. She could create. Her kitchen was messy, crowded with bottles, spoons, and bowls, but to Adana it was a small factory of dreams. She experimented endlessly, trying new ingredients, new scents, new textures. Some batches failed, they separated, smelled too strong, or felt rough on the skin, but she never gave up. Every mistake taught her something, and every success reminded her why she started. She worked late into the night, her fingers sticky, her eyes tired, yet her heart full. Adana imagined women all over Kalonji, women like her mother, women with beautiful skin that deserved respect, using her products. She wanted her creams to speak of pride, not pity, to celebrate African beauty in its raw, natural glory. She wrote down ideas on scraps of paper, drew labels by hand, and even practiced pitching her small brand to the empty room, pretending the city's richest executives were listening. Her friends laughed at the sight sometimes. "You're working too hard for a little stall," they said, but Adana didn't hear them. She had a fire inside, a quiet but unstoppable flame that kept her moving even when her body screamed to rest. Every drop of sweat, every sleepless night, every failed batch was a step closer to something bigger. She wasn't just making creams. She was building her future, shaping her dreams jar by jar, believing that one day, the world would notice the strength and beauty she poured into. One bright morning, as Adana arranged her jars on the stall, a woman in a flowing dress stopped and picked up one of her creams. She smelled it, rubbed a little on her hand, and her eyes widened. "This is amazing," she said, turning to Adana with a smile that felt like sunshine. "Where have you been hiding this? My boutique would love to stock it." Adana felt her chest tighten, a mix of disbelief and excitement. For years she had dreamed of this moment, and now it was real. Within a few weeks, her small brand, Moyo Glow, was no longer just a stall in the dusty market. 3 local boutiques proudly displayed her creams on their shelves, with little tags that read, "Made with Love by Adana." Each order she packed filled her with a quiet pride, the kind that comes not from showing off, but from knowing that something she created was making other people happy. She carefully wrapped each jar, wrote notes to the boutique owners, and even started experimenting with small gift sets, adding dried flowers and little cards that read, "Glow with Confidence." Her stall in the market became a tiny shop she rented in a busy street. It wasn't fancy, but it smelled of cocoa, shea, and ambition. The walls were painted a soft cream color, and sunlight streamed in through the windows, lighting up the rows of jars like tiny treasures. Adana still greeted every customer herself, still smiled at everyone, and still told each person the story behind Moyo Glow. But now people stopped to listen. They asked questions, wanted advice, and even shared her creams with friends. The first break wasn't just about sales or recognition. It was proof that her hard work, her long nights, and her determination had created something real, something beautiful. Adana felt a warm, quiet joy settle in her chest. She was growing slowly but surely, and for the first time, the laughter of that man in the suit felt distant, almost meaningless. The future felt bright, and she was ready to meet it on. Just when Adana thought things were finally falling into place, a new storm hit, and it wasn't just the heavy rains that turned Kalanji City's streets into rivers. Her suppliers, overwhelmed by the floods and delays, couldn't deliver the raw shea and cocoa she needed for her creams. Her small shop, once lined with jars that glowed in the sunlight, now looked bare. Empty shelves reflected her worry back at her, and she could hear the voices of disappointed customers murmuring outside and online. Messages popped up on her phone. "Where are my orders? I've been waiting for weeks." Each notification felt like a tiny pinch, a reminder that success could be fragile. That night, Adana sat on the floor of her small shop, surrounded by empty jars and packaging she couldn't use. Tears ran silently down her cheeks as she thought of all the months she had poured into Moyo Glow. The mornings that began before the sun, the nights that stretched into the dark while she experimented and mixed and hoped. It would have been so easy to give up, to close the shop and pretend none of it ever happened. But in her heart, she felt the spark that had kept her going since Tariq's mocking words. Quitting now would mean letting him win, and she refused. With trembling hands, she counted the few coins left in her drawer. Every single one went into rebuilding, buying small amounts of ingredients, repairing the shelves, and printing new labels. She worked through the floodwaters, trudging to suppliers, negotiating deliveries, and even walking some stock back herself when trucks couldn't reach her. Exhaustion weighed on her body, but she kept moving, because she knew that storms always passed, and she refused to let this one wash away her dreams. By the end of the week, her shelves were slowly filling again, each jar a small victory. Adana wiped her wet cheeks and smiled through the exhaustion. She knew that resilience wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't easy, but it was hers. The laughter. Months passed, and Adana's life began to feel steadier. Moyo Glow was slowly finding its place in the city, and her small shop buzzed with the quiet rhythm of loyal customers and new faces curious to try her creams. She had rebuilt after the floods, worked harder than ever, and grown stronger because of it. Every morning, she opened her shop with the same hope that had carried her through lonely nights and empty shelves. One afternoon, as she sipped tea and checked her phone, a notification caught her eye. Kalanji's biggest cosmetics company was searching for local suppliers to create a new authentic African product line. Adana's heart skipped a beat as she read the announcement again. She knew the company well. It was the same one Tariq worked for, the man who had once laughed at her tiny stall and told her she would never make it. Her first reaction was a flash of anger, but it quickly turned into something stronger, a quiet, burning determination. She pictured the opportunity, the chance to show her craft on a larger stage, to prove that passion and skill could outshine mockery. This wasn't just a business opportunity. It was a chance to tell the world without words that her work mattered. Adana felt a surge of hope and courage swell inside her chest. The thought of Tarek's surprised expression when he saw her submission made her smile softly, but she pushed that aside. This wasn't about revenge. Instead, she focused on preparation. She began planning every detail, imagining how her creams could reflect African heritage, how her story could speak of pride and authenticity. Every ingredient, every label, every message mattered. Adana knew that if she wanted to seize this opportunity, she had to be ready. As the sun set over Kalonji City, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Adana sat at her small work table, sketching designs and writing notes. Her heart was steady now, not racing with fear, but pulsing with purpose. For the first time in it, while the city buzzed with excitement and other suppliers hurried to submit applications to Kalonji's biggest cosmetics company, Adana worked quietly in her small shop. She didn't rush, didn't panic, and didn't compare herself to anyone else. Every day she arrived before sunrise, rolled up her sleeves, and focused on what she could control. Her hands moved with purpose as she improved her formulas, testing textures, scents, and absorbency until each cream felt just right. She wanted her products to be perfect, not flashy, to tell a story of care, tradition, and authenticity. She redesigned her packaging, keeping it simple but elegant, wrapping her jars in soft cream-colored labels with delicate African patterns. Each label carried her message: pride, beauty, and authenticity. She wanted whoever opened a jar to feel a connection to the earth, to the hands that had crafted it, and to the generations of African women who inspired her. Adana also decided to make a short brand video. She invited real women from the neighborhood to participate: mothers, students, and market sellers, women with glowing skin and confident smiles. The camera captured their laughter, their gestures, and the joy of using her creams. She spoke directly to the camera at the end, her voice steady and full of pride. Made by African hands for African skin. It wasn't flashy or rehearsed. It was real. It was hers. No one saw her quietly working late at night, editing the video, tying ribbons on sample jars, and writing heartfelt notes to accompany them. No one saw her pacing, imagining the moment she would finally present her work. But Adana didn't need an audience. She worked for herself, for the women who would use her creams, and for the promise she had made years ago under a flickering lamp, that one day she would rise no matter who laughed at her. Her preparation was silent, patient, and full of care, and in that silence a quiet power grew. Adana knew that when the time came, the morning of the pitch, Adana stood in front of her mirror, smoothing the folds of her golden Ankara dress. The fabric shimmered softly under the sunlight streaming through her window, and she took a deep breath, feeling the weight of every long night, every failed batch, every moment she had poured into Moyo Glow. Today wasn't just another day. It was the day her work, her dreams, and her determination would finally be seen. She entered the grand conference room, the polished floors reflecting the chandeliers above, and felt a flutter of nerves in her stomach. Executives sat around the long table, their eyes curious, some skeptical. Then she saw him, Tarek. He looked just as she remembered, sharp in his tailored suit, smirk playing on his lips, the same one that had echoed through her tiny market stall months ago. Her chest tightened for a moment, a memory of that first sting of humiliation rising up. But she didn't shrink. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and reminded herself why she was here. Not for revenge, not for anger, but to show the world the strength behind her hands and heart. Adana carried her neatly arranged samples to the table, her golden dress flowing around her like sunlight. She noticed the subtle whispers and glances of the other applicants, but she focused only on her products, each jar telling its own story of care, tradition, and authenticity. As she began her presentation, her voice was steady, calm, and confident. She spoke about the heritage behind her ingredients, the women who inspired her, and the pride she poured into every jar. Tarek's smirk didn't fade, but it no longer intimidated her. The room was silent, hanging on every word, every demonstration of her creams. Adana let her work speak, letting the textures, the scents, and the message of Moyo Glow carry the weight. She finished, her eyes meeting Tarek's for the briefest moment. She saw surprise flicker there, a crack in the confidence he once used to mock her. When it was finally Adana's turn, she walked to the center of the room, her golden Ankara dress catching the light with each step. Her heart beat steadily, not with fear, but with the quiet strength she had built over months of hard work, long nights, and countless failures. She took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice calm, clear, and full of conviction. She didn't bring up the past, didn't mention Tariq's laughter or the years of struggle. She let her work speak for her. She explained the story behind Moyo Glow, how every cream was made with care, from carefully sourced African shea and cocoa to the small batches mixed by her hands. She talked about the women who inspired her, the traditions she wanted to honor, and the pride she poured into each jar. Then she demonstrated the textures, the scents, and the way her creams absorbed into the skin, letting the panel experience the results themselves. She spoke with humility, but also with undeniable confidence, showing that her products weren't just about beauty, they were about dignity, culture, and authenticity. The room fell completely silent when she finished. For a moment, there was nothing but the quiet hum of the air conditioning and the soft scratching of pens as the panel considered her presentation. Then one executive leaned forward and whispered almost to himself, "This is exactly what we've been looking for." His words carried through the tension in the room like a gentle but powerful wave of approval. Adana felt her chest swell with a mix of relief and quiet triumph. She glanced at Tariq, who sat stiffly at the table, his smirk gone, replaced by a flicker of shock and disbelief. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The panel's eyes were on her, focused, curious, impressed. In that moment, the years of doubt, of mockery, of struggle all fell away. Adana stood tall, letting the silence confirm what she already knew. She had worked harder than anyone could see, and now, finally, the whirl. Weeks later, Adana's phone rang just as she was finishing packing an order at her small shop. She wiped her hands on her apron, picked up the call, and heard the voice of an executive on the other end. "Ms. Adana, congratulations. Moyo Glow has been selected as the official supplier for our new African heritage product line." For a moment, the words didn't fully register. Her heart skipped, her breath caught, and the world seemed to pause around her. She sank to her knees behind the counter, tears streaming freely down her face. These weren't tears of pride or ego, they were tears of relief, gratitude, and deep quiet joy. Years of hard work, sleepless nights, failed batches, and long days in a tiny kitchen had led to this moment. She thought about her mother's voice, the flickering lamp where she had once promised herself she would rise, and the little stall in Kalonji Market where it had all begun. Every struggle, every mocking word, every sacrifice had carried her here. Her hands shook as she held the phone, whispering a soft thank you to the executive. She couldn't stop smiling, couldn't stop the laughter that bubbled up from the relief, and the realization that her dream had finally touched the world in a way she had always imagined. Orders, contracts, and meetings would come, but right now she let herself feel the weight of this moment. For the first time, she looked at her jars lined neatly on the shelves, each one a little piece of her journey. They weren't just creams anymore. They were proof that patience, resilience, and belief in oneself could transform even the smallest effort into something life-changing. She whispered to herself, softly but firmly, "We did it. We really did it." In that quiet shop under the warm afternoon light, Adana felt a shift in her world. Moyo Glow was no longer just her dream. It was a part of a larger story, a story that would soon reach thousands of women across the country. And for the first time she allowed. At the first official partnership meeting, Adana stepped into the sleek conference room of the cosmetics company, carrying a folder filled with her notes, samples, and ideas. The room smelled faintly of coffee and polished wood, a far cry from the warm, earthy scent of her little shop. She felt a flutter in her chest, not of fear but of focus. Today was about business professionalism, and showing that Moyo Glow belonged on this stage. Tariq stood as she entered, adjusting his suit and extending his hand with a slightly awkward smile. "Congratulations, Ms. Adana," he said, his voice polite but carrying a hint of discomfort. Adana studied him for a brief moment, noting the subtle change in his demeanor. The confidence he once wore like armor now seemed uncertain. She smiled softly and shook his hand firmly, replying with calm composure, "Thank you. I'm honored to work with your company." It was a small gesture, a handshake, a polite exchange, but the balance of power had quietly shifted. In the past, Tariq's laughter had tried to diminish her. Now, his respect was earned, not demanded. Adana felt no need for revenge, no urge to gloat. Her satisfaction came from the grace she carried into the room, the quiet strength that had brought her from a tiny market stall to this very table. The meeting began, and Adana presented her ideas with clarity and passion. She spoke about production timelines, quality control, marketing strategies, and the cultural story behind each product. Every word reflected months of preparation, sleepless nights, and careful attention to detail. Tarek listened, sometimes nodding, sometimes jotting notes, and for the first time, she saw genuine admiration in his eyes. When the meeting ended, contracts were signed, plans were set, and Adana walked out of that room with her head held high. The city outside hummed as usual, but she felt different, not because she had won over someone who doubted her, but because she had stayed true to. Before long, Adana's story began to spread through Kalonji City like wildfire. It started quietly, a whisper at the market, a comment from a neighbor, but soon everyone seemed to know. "Did you hear?" one vendor would say to another, pointing at her small shop with a mixture of awe and curiosity. "The girl who used to sell creams from a tiny stall is now supplying Tarek's company." People leaned in to hear the details, sharing them as if passing along a treasured secret. Street vendors told her story like a modern parable, emphasizing every small struggle and triumph. They spoke of the floods that emptied her shelves, the nights she spent working alone, and the unwavering determination that had carried her through months of doubt. Customers, friends, and strangers repeated her name with admiration. Adana, the girl who turned shame into gold. It became more than a nickname. It was a symbol of perseverance, humility, and quiet power. Women all across the city began to visit her shop not only to buy her creams but to meet the woman behind them. They wanted to touch the jars she had carefully prepared, ask her advice, and hear her story firsthand. Young girls would peek through the windows, imagining their own dreams taking shape one day, inspired by Adana's journey. Mothers told their daughters about her, emphasizing that no amount of mockery or doubt could stop someone who refused to give up. Even in the busiest streets and smallest corners of Kalonji, her story became a gentle legend. People who had never met her knew her name, and everyone who did meet her felt the quiet strength that radiated from her. Adana didn't chase fame, didn't seek applause. She simply continued her work with the same care, love, and dedication she had always had. Yet, everywhere she went, her reputation preceded her, reminding everyone that true success wasn't about wealth or recognition alone. It was about resilience, dignity, and the courage to keep moving forward, no matter age. A few days after the news of her partnership went public, Tarek walked into Adana's new factory. The space was bright and bustling, filled with the warm scent of shea, cocoa, and fresh herbs. Workers moved efficiently, filling jars, labeling packages, and preparing shipments, all under Adana's watchful eye. The contrast between this lively, thriving place and the dusty market stall he had mocked months ago was striking, and Tarek noticed it immediately. He approached her cautiously, his usual confident demeanor softened. "I was wrong about you," he said quietly, almost as if speaking the words out loud made them real. "You built something powerful." There was no smirk, no arrogance, only honesty. Adana looked at him for a moment, seeing not the man who had laughed at her, but someone who was finally facing the truth of what determination and hard work could accomplish. A gentle smile curved her lips. "You didn't break me," she said softly, her voice steady and calm. "You built me." Her words carried no bitterness, no gloating, just the quiet strength that had fueled her journey from a tiny stall to a thriving business. Tarek's eyes flickered with a mix of surprise and humility. He looked down, his posture slightly bowed, realizing for the first time the depth of the woman he had underestimated. As he watched her move among the workers, inspecting batches, giving instructions, and sharing encouragement, he could see the force of her leadership, her care, and her vision. This wasn't just a business. It was a testament to patience, resilience, and grace under pressure. Tarek, who had once defined her by her small beginnings, now understood the power of what she had created with her own hands. Adana didn't need to say more. Her actions, her calm confidence, and the thriving factory spoke louder than any words ever could. Tarek left that day humbled, carrying with him a new respect for the woman who had turned mockery into opportunity, doubt into triumph, and Adana never wanted revenge. The laughter, the mockery, the doubts of others, she let them stay in the past, like shadows that no longer touched her. Instead, she chose a different path, one of generosity, mentorship, and empowerment. She began hosting free workshops in her factory, inviting women from all over Kalonji to learn how to start their own small businesses. Mothers, students, market sellers, and even young girls came, eager to see how someone like Adana had built something real from so little. In the workshops, she shared everything she had learned: how to source materials, test products, manage finances, and most importantly, how to believe in oneself when the world seemed to doubt you. She spoke with warmth and patience, encouraging questions, celebrating small wins, and reminding every woman in the room that their dreams mattered. "They may laugh now," she would say, her eyes shining, "but one day they'll need what you're building." The words weren't just a motto. They were a promise, a shield against fear, and a spark for ambition. Word of her workshop spread quickly, carried by grateful participants and curious neighbors. Women who had once watched from afar now lined up to learn from her, inspired by her journey from a tiny market stall to a thriving brand. Her factory, once just a place of production, became a hub of learning and hope, buzzing with energy, laughter, and ideas. Adana also made it a point to celebrate every success, big or small, of the women she mentored. She attended market openings, congratulated new shop owners, and shared advice long after the workshops ended. Seeing others rise reminded her of the journey she herself had taken, the struggles she had endured, and the quiet power that comes from resilience. Through it all, she carried herself with grace, calm, confident, and kind. She never needed to prove herself by putting others down. Instead, she lifted them up, turning her past struggles into lessons, her pain into. Across Africa, Adana's story spread like wildfire. From small towns to bustling cities, people shared her journey. The girl who had once stood behind a tiny market stall, laughed at and dismissed, now supplying the very company that had mocked her. Social media buzzed with her photos, her quotes, and stories of her grace and determination. He mocked her small business, but she became the supplier his company needed. Headlines read, and people couldn't stop talking about her. Her story wasn't just about business success. It was about resilience, patience, and quiet strength. Women saw themselves in her, inspired to chase their dreams even when the world seemed to doubt them. Mothers told their daughters about Adana, emphasizing that hard work, faith, and self-belief could turn even mockery into opportunity. Young entrepreneurs shared her workshops, and her motto, "They may laugh now, but one day they'll need what you're building," became a mantra across cities and villages. Adana herself didn't chase fame. She continued to craft her creams, mentor other women, and run her growing business with the same care and love as always. Yet everywhere she went, people recognized her, greeted her with admiration, and remembered her story. She had become more than a businesswoman. She had become a symbol of hope, dignity, and divine timing. Her journey reminded everyone that when you build with heart, when you stay true to yourself, even the laughter of others can transform into applause, and every small beginning can lead to something extraordinary.